Welcome to Doing Business with a Servant's Heart, doing business and life with a purpose, serving others and achieving success. I'm your host, Steve Ramona. We created this show for you because we want everyone to learn how to do business and life to make an impact in the world. I want you to think about how you will serve today and what impact will you make today with somebody. Speaking of impact, this guest today has made a major impact in the networking world. And he's really connected probably thousands of people. He probably doesn't know the number, but he's done in such a way that he's got a servant's heart. Ivan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's truly great to be on. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's start with where was the thought process starting BNI and what we were thinking to do?
Well, I'd like to tell you I had this vision of an international organization with, we now have 11,100 chapters in more than 75 countries around the world. 317,000 members. I'd like to tell you I had this vision of a global organization, but the truth is I needed some referrals for my consulting practice and I wanted to help my friends. And so I formed a small group of people to work together to do referrals. And people kept asking me to open new groups and I kept saying yes. And, after a year we had 20 chapters and I wasn't trying. And that's when I realized, wow, this really, I struck a chord in the business community. Business people want referrals, but they don't know how to generate them. And so then I really sat down and created a plan for building BNI and making it global.
It's interesting how a pain point or a need leads to businesses. Talk about that.
Yeah.
You work with a lot of business owners. How important is that?
Yeah, look, I think BNI is a great example of necessity being the mother of invention. I needed something. I knew my friends needed something. And, so we all had a mutual need, and getting us together to serve that or to help solve that is what led to the global organization. And I really had my Brody moment in December of 1985. So it was 11 and a half, 12 months after I started BNI. Between Christmas and New Year's, I always take a little time and reflect. And that year is like, what the heck happened? Because this was not part of my plan to have 20 groups around the country. And, you remember Sheriff Brody in the movie Jaws?
Oh, yeah.
At the end of the movie, the shark comes up for the very first time. You see the shark. And Sheriff Brody turns to the captain and says, "You're going to need a bigger boat." And that was my Brody moment. I realized I was going to need a bigger boat. This was going to be way bigger than I anticipated. In the last 12 months, in the trailing 12 months for BNI, we generated $22.9 billion. That's billion with a B, $22.9 billion worth of business for our members. That's how much our members generated for each other based on our online platform. And we asked them how much business they're getting. Now, just to put it in perspective, if you take UN estimates of GDP, gross domestic product, there are actually 100 countries in the world with a lower GDP than what BNI generated for its members in the last 12 months. I am so proud of what we are doing for business people around the world.
Those are fantastic numbers, and you're so humble, Ivan. I really appreciate that. Let's delve into networking. I'm a big networker. I 100% believe in what you're doing, but how important is it for somebody listening?
Well, I think it's critical. And, a lot of people don't like networking because I think it's often done wrong. And when I started BNI, before I started BNI, I went to some networking groups that were mercenary. Everyone was trying to sell to me. I'd go home and I felt like I needed a shower because I'd been slimed. And then I went to these other groups. They were totally social. It was happy hour and hors d'oeuvres. And I didn't like either of those. What I wanted was something that was focused on business, but not mercenary, that was relational, but not totally social. And put those two concepts together, and the glue that would hold it together is our philosophy of giver's gain. This idea that if you want to get business, you got to be willing to give business. You got to help other people first before you ask for business. And with that philosophy, it's been a game changer in the organization. And I think that the people like that approach to doing business. One of the books I did a book on business networking and gender, the difference between men and women and how they network. which goes directly to your question. We asked them, has networking played a role in your success? And we surveyed 12,000 people for that. 12,000 people. 91.4% of the respondents said, yeah, networking has played a role in their success. When have you ever seen 91% of any group of people agree to anything ever? But they do agree that networking is important. They just don't always like it because it can be, very mercenary or very social.
Mm-hmm. No, mercenary is a great word because it really delves right into it, because pitch slapping is another thing I've heard from other people. It's another thing you could call. So can you do me a favor? Somebody's listening going, I don't like networking, Ivan. I love, what's a tip you could, or a couple tips you could give them to really make it comfortable for them? Because networking, I believe, is so important for your business. If you're not doing it right, you're not going to run.
It is. I think all too often people use networking as a face-to-face cold calling opportunity. Hi, Steve, my name's Ivan. Let's do business. And they go right into doing business. And I think that's a huge mistake. So why network if you're not going to, do business? Well, you are going to do business, but you got to understand a concept that I call the VCP process: visibility, credibility, profitability. First, you have to be visible. People have to know who you are and what you do. And once people know who you are and what you do, then you have to develop credibility with them. And credibility is where, people know who you are, they know what you do, and they know you're good at it. They know you're good at it because you have a good reputation in the community. And then and only then can you get the profitability where people know who you are, they know what you do, they know you're good at it, and they're willing to refer you business on an ongoing basis. So I would urge people, don't go to networking meetings to close sales. Go to networking meetings to build relationships. And through those relationships, you build trust. And through that trust, you get referrals.
I was just going to mention relationships because that's what reputation is built on.
Totally.
Right? Go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. It's, networking is more about farming than it is about hunting. It's about cultivating relationships with people.
How important is for people in their business to meet new people? Whatever that, I talk to people, 10 to 15 new people a week. You're going to see massive growth in months in your business.
Yeah, I think it's a combination.
Okay.
I think on one hand, you got to be filling the pipeline with relationships, because people come, people go, people move, people change careers. They retire, they have illnesses. So you got to be constantly filling the pipeline. At the same time, you want to go deep with some of the relationships. So if your network is a mile wide but an inch deep, it'll never be powerful. You need a network that is both wide in places that is both wide and deep in places. By deep, those are the people that you're at profitability with. Those are the people that are willing to refer you. And so with some people, you really want to go deep in building, a long-term relationship, oftentimes by meeting them at networking groups on a regular basis, every month in a chamber or every week in a BNI group, where you're really getting to know a handful of people. And at the same time, you got to go out and meet people. It's one of the reasons why I tell my own members, go join the Chamber of Commerce. Go join Rotary, Lions, or Kiwanis, because it gives you an opportunity to meet a lot of other people. And then in BNI, you're building, strong relationships with a handful of people. And you could do that with those others as well. But it's that combination that makes a successful network.
I just love what you just did there. You went from BNI, but the chambers and the Kiwanis, and hey, just don't focus. BNI is great, but work other avenues and channels for your business.
Yeah, it's like an investment advisor. If you have an investment advisor who says, put all your money in this one place, that's bad advice. Well, the truth is, if you want to build a powerful personal network, you need to diversify your network in many ways. You want to participate in different kinds of groups, like a chamber and a service club and a BNI group. You want to diversify your networks in terms of the kinds of people that you surround yourself with. Networks are by nature clumpy. That's the technical term. We hang out with people like ourselves. That's human nature. That's not a good network. If you want to build a powerful personal network, you got to diversify not only the types of networks, but the kinds of people in your network. Because and I'm talking about ethnicity, age, education, socioeconomic background. I mean, the more different education, I hang out with I teach at Concordia in the MBA program. So I have contacts in university and I have contacts in business. Those are two completely different clusters of people. Here's the beauty of diversifying the types of people, is that if you have someone who's really different than you, different age, different ethnicity, but You then have a connector who connects you to another cluster of people. So the more connections you have to other clusters of people who aren't like you, the more powerful your network is.
Yeah.
So diversity in your network is not only the right thing to do, it's also good business.
I mean, I love it because this is really taking it. This is advanced networking training. It's just not going to meet people. Hey, Ivan, great to meet you. Let's go to the flip side of
Hey,
that.
by the way, may
Go
I
ahead.
suggest when you meet somebody, rarely, if ever, say it's nice to meet you unless they say that first. Here's why. The more you go out and network, the more you're going to meet people, and then you might forget them. And when you see them a second time, you might forget that you've met them. And if you say, nice to meet you, they'll go, gee, Steve, we met a month ago. We met 2 months ago. And so always say, unless they say it's nice to meet you, always say it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I love
Because
it.
it's a very subtle way of not putting your foot in your mouth, if you've already met that person. And if you're someone like me who networks a lot and goes out a lot, I'm meeting people that I've met already, but sometimes 2 or 3 years earlier. And, they like to think that you remember who they are, even though you can't always do that.
No, that's $1,000 tip, audience, right there. That is a great tip. Now, I hear a lot as I'm talking to people about networking and I love clusters, and I'm going to borrow that. It's such a great, but if I got a cluster, but I've got that negative, that bad apple in the cluster, how do they handle it?
Oh, we call it addition by subtraction. The best way to build your network is to sometimes cut it back. And you cut it back with the bad apples. And I first learned this because I went home one day when I lived in Southern California, and we had like 50 rose bushes around my house. And my late wife, I went in the house and I said, she had cut all the rose bushes way back. And I was like, why'd you cut all the rose bushes back like that? She said, oh, well, if you want them to bloom, you have to cut them back. Sometimes that's your network. If you want your network to bloom, sometimes you got to cut it back. And what do you cut back? You cut back the people that are, the bad apples, or in one of my books, in Who's in Your Room, about the people you surround yourself with, which is exactly this topic. You have in your life engines and anchors. Mm-hmm. Engines are people who drive you forward. They make you the best version of yourself. Anchors are people that just drag you down. The worst is an anchor with an engine attached. They're driving you down fast. So you surround yourself with engines, and sometimes that means you got to cut back a little bit.
Yep. If they don't do it, what's the end result? Cut back.
Well, if you don't, you end up miserable because you've surrounded yourself with people that you really don't want to be around. So let me give you the concept of who's in your room, because even though it's not about networking, it's kind of all about networking because it's about who you surround yourself with. And if networking is about relationships, that's important. So the concept of the book, Who's in Your Room, is this. Imagine you live your life in one room, and that one room has only one door. And that one door is an enter-only door, so that when people come into your life or into your room, they're there forever. You can never get them out. Now, luckily, this is a metaphor, but if it were true, Steve, would you be more selective about the people you've let into your life?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so we would argue it's not a metaphor. We would argue it's true, and here's why. What I want you to do is think about it. And if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, I want you to do the same. I want you to think about somebody you've gotten out of your life, because people tell me you can get people out of your life. It is a metaphor. You can get them out of your life. All right. So Steve, I want you to think of someone you got out of your life who was an anchor. They were toxic. They were difficult. You didn't like them. You wanted them out of your life. You got them out of your life. You have someone in mind. You don't have to share who it is.
I do.
Okay. So now I want you, and I want the audience, I want all of you to think about what the person did. That was it. That was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. You're out. So do you have that situation in your mind, Steve?
I do.
Okay. So if they're still in your head, they're still in your room. And they will be for the rest of your life, because their fingerprints are all over your brain. Even though they may not be in your life, they're in your head. See, the room starts here and ends here. The room is your mind. And so what we talk about is, how do you get selective about the people you bring in, and what do you do to deal with the people who have gotten in, or family members that you had no choice on? And so, yeah, you got to be addition by subtraction. Sometimes you cut them loose from active participation in your room, but they're always going to be there in your head.
And do you just live with that person in your room in your head, or is there a
Well,
way to get removed them?
you kind of do, because your experiences, if you run
Yeah.
into an experience that is somewhat similar, you're gonna go back to that experience you have with that person. What we talk about is you stick them in a lockbox and put them up on a shelf. When I was a young man, my mother used to say to me, honey, you obsess over stuff too much. Sometimes you have to take that problem, stick it in a box, and put it up on a shelf. And that problem will be there tomorrow if you want to pull it down and take a look at it. Well, that person's going to be there tomorrow. That memory of them will be there, but you got to put it in a box and stick it on a shelf. And that's the way you deal with the people that are in your room, but you want out of your life.
Out of sight, out of mind is what comes to my head, in essence.
Yeah, and you bring it down when you need to.
Yeah.
Gee, I was in a situation like this before, and this is what I ended up doing. I need to do that quicker.
That's such a great way of doing it, and it's a very comfortable way of doing it without feeling that you're being mean or being negative to the person. Because that's what I hear a lot. I don't want to get about. If you're affecting your growth, then you'll never grow it, and I appreciate
Correct.
that.
Yeah.
What does a servant leader look like to you?
Well, I think a servant leader is someone who is there to help the people around them be more successful. As a leader, my role in certainly in BNI and as an author is I want to inspire people, but I want to inspire people who inspire other people, because leadership, I think, is and John Maxwell would tell you this in his book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And I know John, and he would say one of the most important things is influence. How do you influence people? And are you leaving a positive influence in the world?
Mhm.
Because we all have people that are in our story, right, Steve? I have people who have changed my life in one way or another in a positive way, and they're in my story. And I tell about my experience with these amazing people who did something for me that changed my life, which is all great. We need that. But here's the more important thing: it's not who's in your story. The real question is, whose story are you in?
Mhm.
Whose life have you changed in some way, helped in some way, in order for them to feel that that relationship had a positive impact on them? That's what servant leadership is about to me. It's whose story are you in?
That's I love that, because we always talk about our story and they're great, but an influencer, a mentor, is not doing it unless they're in somebody else's story. I
Yeah.
just help XYZ to do this.
Well, and when they say that, Steve changed my life by doing this or saying that, then that's leadership.
Yeah. Greatest
That's
feeling in the world.
certainly servant leadership.
Yeah. And that's the greatest feeling in the world. Somebody asks you, Ivan, I want to be a leader. What do I do?
Well, first you need a follower. So I teach leadership in the MBA program at Concordia, and I start the semester with this. And you've probably seen the YouTube video. There's this YouTube video of this concert, and some young kid stands up in a field, and he just starts dancing really crazy, just crazy dancing. But he's jamming with the music, and you look at this and you think, what is wrong with this guy? And after about a minute or two, somebody else comes up and starts dancing next to him. There's another guy. And so the first guy, hey, shakes the hand of the second guy. Hey, man. And so now the two of them are dancing. And then there's 3, and then there's 5, and then there's 50, and then there's 100. And then the entire field is full of people dancing. In order to be a leader, you need followers. And so you need to influence people in a positive way. I mean, you could do it in a negative way, and some leaders have done that.
Yeah.
But I believe in influencing people in a positive way to get them to coach them and guide them in a direction that is good for everybody.
Describe the feeling of bringing somebody success so the audience can hear why they want to be a leader. What's that feeling look like to you?
So For me, it goes back to something I read in college. And I'll paraphrase it. It was Jean-Paul Sartre who said, we all die too soon or too late, and yet our life is complete at that moment with the line drawn neatly under it, ready for the summing up. You are your deeds in life and little more. And so to me, it's the deeds that you have in life that influence others in a positive way. I think that's the answer to the question.
It's a great answer. I love that because it's so true. I talk about the credits of a movie. What are your credits after you pass?
Oh, I love
And
that. That's a great
a friend of
great way of
mine,
looking
my
at
business
it.
partner talks about that, CEO of your life and the credits, watching the movie and going, oh, Steve did this, Ivan did, and it's just everybody wants to leave a great legacy. So it's the power of that. One thing I hear from business owners is I want to be a servant business, but I also have profits. They want to be servant first and then profit second. What kind of advice would you give a business owner like has that mentality?
Well, there's nothing wrong with making a good living while making a difference. I believe you can make a good living while making a difference. And that's what I've tried to do certainly with BNI.
Yeah.
Is I make a good living with BNI, and I've also, I believe, made a big difference for a lot of people, particularly during difficult economic times or COVID. Oh my goodness, tens of thousands of businesses survived COVID because of their participation in BNI. It kept their business alive because they were able to, we transitioned from a completely in-person organization. When COVID hit, we had just under 10,000 chapters, completely in-person organization to within weeks in every country, a completely online organization. And that kept thousands and thousands of businesses alive, and some not only stayed alive, but they actually thrived because in their networking, they would do these one-to-one meetings where they were talking about the challenges they had. And I'll give you a great example: a furniture reupholstery shop in California. And she told the person, a fellow member who she was doing a one-to-one online with, I had to lay off all my employees because it's not an essential business. And he said, you have a lot of cloth in your warehouse, don't you? And she said, I literally have tons of cloth. And if you think back, Steve, to like March of 2020, one of the big problems was a lack of masks. And so the BNI member tells this furniture reupholstery shop, another BNI member, why not pivot temporarily and make COVID masks out of the cloth you've got? She's like, wow, what a great idea. So she went out and made 50 masks by herself in her warehouse. She made 50 masks. And she gave them to her network, to her BNI members, her personal network. She gave 2 to everybody, along with a business card. And she said, one is a gift for you. The other, would you give it to someone you know who's a nurse, a doctor, who works in a hospital or a senior center? Give it to somebody along with my card and let them know I can manufacture masks immediately. She was overwhelmed with orders and was able to hire back all of her employees. Oh, she physically distanced them, but she was able to hire them all back. And that's the kind of difference that can happen when you're building a powerful personal network.
That's incredible. And COVID's death. We're talking serious. I mean, there's other areas, stories, but that's a powerful story. I love it. Well, we've run out of time, Ivan. I really appreciate it. Is there any books or anything you want to share with the audience before we close out?
Well, since you give me that opportunity, I literally just came out with this book. It's called The Third Paradigm. And it's about co-creation. The first paradigm is about competition. The second paradigm is about cooperation. The third paradigm is about co-creation. And the more businesses can really understand the process of co-creation, the more successful they're going to be in going into the 21st century. A good example of co-creation that everybody recognizes is crowdsourcing. But there are other examples, and we talk about them in the book. We also surveyed 4,000 people for this. So we had a lot of people who said, okay, here are the things to do, and here are things to stay away from in co-creation. And then, of course, we had our opinions and ideas about the process in addition to that. It's a great book. It just came out. It's been out for about 2 months.
You sold me, because co-creation reminds me of partnerships, and that's all I do is bring people together. Same type of thing. I love it. So you sold the book here. So
all right, fantastic. Do a review.
Excuse me. I will do a review.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for your time. I know you're a very productive man, and you're doing lots of things. Is there any way people can reach out to somebody about BNIs?
Yeah, sure. BNI.com is the place to go to, and you can look for information on a BNI website, or I'm sorry, on a BNI location on that website. Also, if any of your audience would like to check out my blog, it's all free content. I've been blogging for 16 years, twice a week. So there are literally thousands of posts in there, all free content that your audience can go and read.
Well, thank you, Ivan. I'll put this all in the show notes so all of you have access to it.
Yeah, the blog is ivanmeisner.com.
ivanmeisner.com. Great. We'll put it in there. And I want to thank everybody for listening. Do me a favor. Re-listen to this, because Ivan has given you so many tips. Could be worth millions of dollars to you down the road. So re-listen to this podcast, and he's giving you free advice. I would take advantage of it. And I want to thank you all for listening. We'll see you all on the next episode of Doing Business with a Servant's Heart.